I want to go back to something quickly because it's quite amusing. I just want to talk very quickly about clothes. Because I'm curious.
And
no,
Glenn,
I just want to.
Glenn is modelling the green
exactly.
shirt.
Yes,
he wanted to try something a little different, so he can tell the difference.
I hope you've all been noticing.
Series.
I hope you've been noticing that every empowering conversation I've been wearing. This. Don't worry, I'm going to edit this out. And we've been wearing a different coloured shirt. In fact, I have not worn the same.
It is not a continuity error.
This is the 10th series, so we've had 10 different colours. It's the 10th series.
It's the 10th series?
It's number 10, yeah.
So that means we're going to cross the 100. We should be able to cross it, because
we're up 12. To 81 or something.
We're usually able to get 12 out of each series, aren't we?
No, we're getting on average between 6 and 9.
So we got 12, 13 out of the first 2.
And some of them have been less. Yeah.
Sorry.
Actually, yeah, series 9. Yeah, clothing. No, I just wanted to mention this because I thought it was really good again, and it just something you said earlier just triggered something in me that thought this is interesting, and I wanted to ask you a question. So, Neale Donald Walsch in Conversations with God, which I think is fantastic. Volume 3 is amazing. It's got everything. It's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, do read it. Anyway, he talks in the book about so-called highly evolved beings. I don't know if I've shared this with you before. But these highly evolved beings, according to God, in the Conversation with God, okay, are beings that live in advanced civilizations on other planets, okay? So just bear with me on this, whether you believe it or not. That doesn't really matter, okay? But what he says, because Neale Donald Walsch, being very curious, asked God, well, you know, these advanced beings on other planets, you know, how do they live? You know, what sort of houses do they live in? All the sort of stuff that perhaps on a superficial level, arguably, we would be very interested in. And one of the things he says, well, what do they wear? And guess what? They don't wear a thing. They walk around naked, okay? And Neale Donald Walsch says, well, God, that must be barbarian, you know, and goes on to say, and then he says, well, even if it's not barbarian, how, you know, do they survive in cold weather, you know, all the extremes of temperature? And God says, well, actually, they've learned how to control the temperature. They've learned how to control the weather. They can control literally the ambient temperature. And they have no need to wear clothes because they have no conception of why one would want to wear clothes to be, if you like, more attractive. Now, I know that that's not the only reason that we wear clothes, but it is a very strong reason for most of us, I think. Especially our female friends. Sorry, girls, but it's true. And he says there's absolutely no reason for them to want to wear clothes, or even, because you mentioned earlier about adornments or whatever the word was, and they have no need for those either. Now, think of that, okay? So we could actually potentially, if that is true, and I'm not saying it is or not, you know, we could actually cross off clothes as being a need. Maybe on this planet, given our level of consciousness at the moment, it is a need.
And I think we have to work within that.
And we have to work within that.
I don't go against actually what Neale Donald said there. It ties in with the Vedic picture of, for the Vedas.
And you mentioned the guys in the Himalayas with no clothes.
Well, that's right, but that's a very specific situation of, you know, heightened consciousness, and you know what that enables you to do.
So this was my question: do we need to have heightened consciousness to walk around naked?
There is a couple of stories in the Puranas about one, but in one particular one is interesting, where a sage called Shukadev, he was young, 16 years old, wandered around naked, completely oblivious to the fact that he was in any way different to all the clothed persons around him, because in his perception of any other person. All he saw was the soul.
Mm.
He just saw the Atma resident within, within this kind of physical form. It didn't matter what the physical form was, and it didn't matter what the physical form was covered with.
Mm.
He made no distinction, male, female, old, young. It just did, even species. He was just actually seeing the life forces around him in their state of existence. He was, and in that sort of situation, you're not actually a great deal of use in so-called.
So there's no
material.
point in seeing the clothes, is there? Because nothing to see. Is that what you're saying?
There's nothing. Because what he's seeing is the state of their sojourn in material existence.
Seeing their life force.
Seeing their life force in the context of their overall journey through millions of births. Not really worried in what they're caught up with on the day-to-day situation. However, as he walked along, people were following him and chiding him, even throwing things at him. But again, he was completely oblivious. But actually the reaction around him was, here's a madman who we can make fun of.
Because he's not like us.
He's not like us.
Yeah.
And he just walked through the society, and then he arrived at a gathering of other sages who had been involved in an intense yajna. They got together and they were really kind of trying to understand, well, what do we need to kind of do for the benefit of human society, in the current circumstance. Yeah. This is 5,000 years ago when they were worried about society and where it was going.
What happened in between?
Well, they were a little worried. They were, what at least can we, offer that would be. Yeah. So when Shukadev walks in the middle of these sages, they all stand up and go, here is the self-realized personality they recognized, his level of consciousness. Yeah. So they said, please, will you sit and answer our questions? And everyone who was following Shukadev and throwing, right, and so all these kind of sages who they knew, were kind of pretty special personalities, and then, okay, sorry, just kind of disappeared off. So I don't know if that answered your question about. But
you said there were two stories. That was one.
Well, another one was Jad Bharat. A very similar situation, kind of highly elevated person. In his case, he was he had chosen to avoid any kind of interaction or involvement with society, out of a concern that he might become entangled in material circumstances. So slightly different circumstances.
Okay, so this.
But he was also treated as a madman until at some point. Actually, the story was, there was some Maharaj who was being carried on with a palanquin, but there was only 3 of the carriers. One of them had got injured, so they needed a 4th, and they saw Jad Bharat, who looked strong. Okay, he was dishevelled. He was naked. He just a Babaji. You come here, carry the palanquin. So there he was trying to carry the palanquin, on his shoulder. But as he was walking, there was ants on the path, and his principle was, I'm not going to harm another living being, for my benefit. Right. So he was trying to kind of avoid them and walk around, and the palanquin was going this way and that. And eventually the Maharaj said, "Stop! This is ridiculous. You're useless. You're not. You look strong, but you're weak. And Jad Bharat replied, "You're quite right. I am none of those things. I am not strong. I am not weak. I am not clever. I am not foolish. I am not old or young. I'm a spiritual being. And I just, live forever as a spiritual being. I just happen to be within this material body at this time." And the king went, "Sorry, actually, please enlighten me."